A few weeks ago, I started a series of messages based on 2 Corinthians, the second lesson for the weeks in the beginning of the summer. And the reason I do that is that very often we don't really pay much attention to the second reading when it comes up in the service because it's not really connected with the first lesson or the gospel lesson, which usually are connected. And so we just kind of have that lesson and it moves on. Well, I've been focusing on the second lesson because there's a lot there. And it's a challenge for me as a pastor to get inside the mind and the heart of the Apostle Paul, who is the author of many of the lessons that we have, the second lessons, especially during the summer. Now, it's a big challenge for me to preach about these things. You might think, well, like somebody said to me recently, you've been a pastor almost 45 years. What's the big deal? It shouldn't be that hard for you to come up with a sermon after 45 years. And my response is, that's exactly why it's so hard. How much more is there for me to say that has not already been said? It's not that easy. Especially when the same congregation is there to hear it year after year as you have been for 35 years. Nevertheless, as I thought about that, I began to realize that that's similar to the problem that the Apostle Paul had when he was writing to this church in Corinth. He was writing to a church that he cared very much about. It was a church that he had actually founded himself there in Corinth. And while we call this 2 Corinthians, because we know there's a letter from Paul called 1 Corinthians, chances are he wrote 2 or maybe 3 other letters that we don't have available. And so it's obvious that this apostle had a very deeply felt relationship with these people. And one of the things also about the Apostle Paul's relationship with this church is that he had been there as a pastor of the church that he founded for a year and a half. Now, in modern times, a pastor serving only a year and a half is considered to be an interim pastor. But the fact of the matter is that for a missionary to spend a year and a half in one location is an enormous amount of dedication and affection for the people. And so he had preached to them for a year and a half, and then at some point he was actually brought before the civil authorities and accused of various crimes and stuff like that. And so the time came for him to move on with the gospel. Now he was writing to them because they were experiencing challenges. Challenges from these so-called, or we call them, super apostles. The ones who knew better than the Apostle Paul what the truth of the gospel really was. And they were following after the Apostle Paul, going from one place to another where Paul had already been in order to be able to undo all the harm that the Apostle had been doing with his preaching. Paul loved these people. He believed very strongly that something really important had taken place in history. And he wanted these people to know what that was and to cherish it. He believed that through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God had changed the world forever. Just think about that for a moment. That is the very heart of our Christian witness to the world. Through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God has changed this world forever. The problem with people in Corinth, of course, they were very much like many of us are today, here and now people who like to get responses to things very quickly. And when the Apostle Paul started preaching about the new creation had come, they wanted to see it here, now, right here, boom, put it right before us, the new creation. That's not the way God works in the world. And even though in the 2nd chapter of Genesis it says that God created the world in one day, that's the second story of creation. The fact of the matter is that the new creation is a much longer process of development. God is at work transforming this world, overcoming the forces of sin and death and evil in the world. bringing about reconciliation, peace, love, justice, righteousness, harmony among all the nations of the world. God has been at work doing that. That was God's intention from the very beginning. And then in the death and resurrection of Jesus, God staked his colony in this world so that people would be able to see and hear and know that God's love is for real for all people. So when the apostle is speaking to the Corinthians, he's trying to get across that something has happened and that is what's going on right now. As we work together with him, Paul writes, we urge you not to accept the grace of God in vain, for he says, at an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. And then he goes on to say, see, now is the acceptable time. Now, today is the day of salvation. Don't wait till you're dead. Heaven has come to earth in Jesus Christ. And God is making his presence and his power known. And the evidence of that is you, the body of Christ. As one author put it, God's colony in man's world. In order for that colony in man's world to have its full impact, it's got to take a lot of effort. And the Apostle Paul is very aware of the fact that it was not just what he did that was capable of bringing this message to the world, that this was a message that everybody needed to hear, and so it required the effort of all of the baptized people of God. The message of the gospel cannot be assigned to one individual for the sake of the world. This is one of the problems that pastors often have in churches. Because whether they intend to or not, very often pastors are the ones that are given the job of proclaiming the gospel to all the people, and everyone else is expected to simply accept it and go on. But here the message is that much more important. It is a message not just for pastors and pulpits. It is a witness for God's people as they live in God's colony in this world. Paul was feeling a lot of pain because he knew the struggles that were going on in Corinth. He knew that the people there were lacking in passion and fervor for the gospel. They had become distracted by worldly pursuits. They had become embroiled in interpersonal conflicts and meaningless debates. That's why he appealed to them. Do not accept the grace of God in vain. God has done something among you. Don't let it go to waste. I have to admit, sometimes as a pastor over all these years, I've found myself feeling in a way that it sounds like Paul is expressing. As he was wondering, what impact has my ministry had on the lives of people? What difference, if any, has it made that the gospel has been proclaimed? Has it made any difference? And more importantly, is it still making any difference in the lives of people? In this letter, 2 Corinthians, Paul is sharing his passion for God's people. He feels deeply for them. He has sacrificed greatly for them. Listen to what he says once more. We're putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry, but as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We're treated as impostors, and yet are true, as unknown, and yet are well known, as dying, and see, we are alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing everything. The apostle reached out to those Corinthians with that life-giving, life-transforming message in their own day. And through his word that we have heard today, he's reaching out to you and to me as well. That's really why I'm talking today, because I want you to hear that something really tremendous has happened in this world, which has changed the world forever. That something is Jesus. That Jesus is coming to enter into a relationship with each one of us as his people, each one of us who's been baptized in the name of the Triune God. With our younger brother Louis, who is to be baptized today, and all the rest of you. There's a mission that God is carrying out. That mission needs to be owned by everyone who's been baptized in order for that mission to be complete. That's all I really need to share with you today. That's all I really want to share with you, so that, like those people in Paul's days, we can say, we believe, and so we speak. Open your eyes to see what God is doing in the world. Open your ears to hear what God is saying in the world and to you. And then, as the apostle says, open wide your hearts also, so that God's kingdom may reign in you.